how does moral injury specifically differ from PTSD in terms of how it's defined, first of all, but also in how it can be treated or could be treated?
Yeah, and that's the million-dollar question. So how does it differ from PTSD? The most recent criteria in the diagnostic manual, the fifth version, actually includes guilt and shame, but it doesn't address specifically moral injury. And so Rakesh and I have actually been talking about how can we make this more prominent in, the classification of post-traumatic stress. We've been discussing, does it need to be a separate subtype? Or, how do we go about classifying this in more detail? So I think that's still an open question. And in terms of treatment, these recent results that we got really made me think about, how we need to think about treatment in really two ways. There's top-down approaches, right, which cognitive behavioral therapy is a great example of. So that really, we work with our thinking brain, with the narrative, with language, and we really modulate the brain top down, right? So the brain can regulate from a top down way these emotional responses. But if this top part of the brain is not fully functioning, as it seems to be in moral injury, then we also need to think about bottom-up mechanisms, right? So how can we intervene at a bottom-up level? And some of these treatments are bodily-based treatments, yoga, exercise. I think psychedelics also have the ability to intervene at a bottom-up level and kind of reset the brain from that kind of level. Neurofeedback is another way that can, I think, intervene from a bottom-up level. And so how can we really shift this emotion from being just a visceral sensation to an emotion that somebody can think about and that somebody can process at a higher level? Because in order to shift things eventually, you have to rethink the experience, right? And kind of really reset the experience and think about, maybe this wasn't my fault, right? I did the best that I could. This was my job. I had to do this to protect my comrades. But in order to be able to process at that level, you have to be able to label the emotion. It has to be at a conscious level. And all those higher level structures need to be online. And so I think that's how we need to think about this type of treatment.
I think just to echo that, beautifully put, Ruth. I think we've talked about let's get rid of the mind-brain duality, but let's also get rid of the brain-body duality.
Yes.
Right? Let's get rid of that, because the idea is to think for a moment that diseases of the mind, diseases of the brain don't affect the body. And we've talked about inflammation. We've talked about all of these things. When you look at veterans of war, whether it's World War I, World War II, and the most recent conflicts, they tend to have a higher rate of physical illnesses, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, chronic pain. So there is something going on in the body. There's something going on in the neuroendocrine system, the immune system, whether it's inflammation, whether it's all of these things. And we're seeing sort of the inflammation of the blood vessels of the heart cause an increase in heart disease. So the idea of, again, if mental illness can affect the body, maybe working at the body can also affect the mind, right? So the idea of this duality, the coexistence of them as opposed to a this or that, I think is really important. Again, the reason why we are committed to this battery of biomarkers as well. We are looking to see not just how the brain structure and function changes with the psychedelic and the psychotherapy, but we're also looking to see how the immune system responds, how the inflammatory system responds, because when you see psychedelics being sort of pitched, for lack of a better word, for all of these treatments, from addictions to pain to depression or PTSD, it's either snake oil or there is something underlying, a common mechanism, which is, again, what we're committed to looking for as well and adding to the literature. So we'll do a battery of tests, whether it's blood, imaging, pre and post, to kind of see, do we settle down the inflammation in the body through the psychedelic? psychedelic treatment and psychotherapy. So I think that's the important piece as well. So we'll get away from the duality of brain and mind, but we'll also get away from the duality of brain, mind, and body, and realize that there's a whole human there, and that's what we're going to try to work on. I don't want to use the cliche of holistic, but in some sense that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, the past methodologies of binning these different systems as if they don't interact and don't, talk to each other is really just sort of, antiquated at this point. And when you think about just the basic facts of what we're doing on a, cellular level or on a drug design level, we're taking a psychedelic substance which binds to serotonin receptors, and we know that there's serotonin receptors in all sorts of different organ systems throughout the body, not just the central nervous system. So you'd expect these sort of whole body effects and aspects to the treatment. So it's best to understand that. And the other side of that too, where Rakesh was mentioning these biomarkers that we have interest in, this isn't quite as visually profound and interesting as some of the fMRI work, where you can see very sort of visual representations of the data. But the molecular biology side of this has also seen massive increases in the technology and the ability to look at these sorts of metrics in more and more depth. And so the two of them are really moving forward nicely and allowing us to shine a better light on what's actually happening mechanistically. That really can't be understated, that the underlying science has significantly gotten better while this has all happened, and the increasing interest in the field has happened, and all of them are working together. The current situation wouldn't have materialized without one of those aspects.